Working with Seke is great for me because he's very open to that process of just like throwing a lot of things at each other, throwing sound and movement at each other, finding what seems to sort of meet each other nicely, often in quite unexpected ways. So what was great, we had some long chats, and I played some sound to Seke when he was talking about some of the themes that were in his head. And that set some thoughts off in my mind. And then when it came to some days when we were working with the dancers in the studio together, improvising or setting up certain structures to improvise within, I'd gathered some materials that I thought might be good for what we'd been talking about. And then, as usual, in a really nice way, some things sort of just began to sort of meet each other, and sometimes in some really surprising ways for me. And then it was just a case of going away and taking some of those ideas and expanding on them or refining them. There was one idea that forms the last section of the piece. There's 4 musical sections to the piece, and the last section is much longer. And there was one idea that actually I talked about when we very first met. I said I'd really like this idea of something very, very slow and low to begin with, gradually sort of building up, almost so you don't notice it building up until it's really big. And actually, that idea has happened in the 4th section of the piece. So, yeah, playing around, finding things that meet the dance in an interesting way, and the text, of course. I sat in on some of the early text writing workshops and participated in those. So I had some idea about the idea of the sort of scenarios that were coming up from the dancers. And I took away 4 particular scenarios that had come up in those workshops and began to work some of the ideas that I'd found that were working for me musically in the studio with the movement into those scenarios. So for me, there was like 4 particular sections. One was an abandoned, a deserted city, perhaps on another planet maybe. Perhaps there'd been a war or something like that. So that's the first section. The second section was someone abandoned on a desert island. And for that, it's quite funny. I took some harp music and worked with that, which is one of the things that Seke and I we both went, wow, this isn't like anything you would normally write. So that was I was like, oh yeah, that's a good thing to go on. I wouldn't normally write this. And I took inspiration for that sort of from when I was a kid, and I'd be sick off school and you'd watch those sort of Technicolor movies that were on the TV in those days, and slightly cheesy sort of images of desert island shipwrecks and things. Third section was the idea of being lost in a forest, and I had this sort of feel of almost like sitting around some people who were lost in the forest, sitting around a campfire just as it was getting dark. And then the last section was being lost in the Arctic.